Pipes have two typical use cases: transformation, where we transform input data to the desired output, and validation, where we evaluate input data and, if valid, simply pass it through unchanged. If the data is not valid, we want to throw an exception. In both cases, pipes operate on the arguments being processed by a controller's route handler. Nest.js triggers a pipe just before a method is invoked. Pipes also receive the arguments meant to be passed on to the method. Any transformation or validation operation takes place at this time. Afterwards, the route handler is invoked with any potentially transformed arguments. Nest.js comes with several pipes available out of the box, all from the Nest.js common package. For example, validation pipe, which we've seen in previous lessons, and parse array pipe, which we haven't seen, but it's an extremely helpful pipe that helps us parse and validate arrays. To learn how we can build our own custom pipes, let's create a pipe that automatically parses any incoming string to an integer, and let's call it parseInt pipe. Nest already has a parseInt pipe that we could use from the Nest.js common library, but let's create this basic pipe for learning purposes to help us fully understand the basic mechanics of a pipe. Let's fire up the terminal and generate a pipe class using the Nest CLI pipe schematic, placing it in the common/pipe folder and calling it parse-int. Note that we generated this pipe in the common directory again, where we can keep things that aren't tied to any specific domain. Let's open up this newly generated parseInt pipe file and see what we have inside. As we can see, the Nest CLI generated an example pipe for us without any logic inside. Similar to providers, a pipe is a class with the injectable decorator. But all pipes should implement the pipe transform interface exported from Nest.js Common. This interface requires us to provide the transform method within our class. This transform method has two parameters: value, the input value of the currently processed argument before it is received by our route handling method, and metadata, the metadata of the currently processed argument. Whatever value is returned from this transform function completely overrides the previous value of the argument. So when is this useful? Consider that sometimes the data passed from the client needs to undergo some change before this data can be properly handled by the route handler method. Another example use case for pipes would be to provide default values. Imagine if we had some required data fields that were missing. We could automatically set these defaults within a pipe. Transformer pipes can perform these functions by interposing the transformation function we create between the client request and the request handler. This is merely another example, but the point is to show that there are many powerful things you can do with pipes. Alright, so back to creating a custom parseInt pipe. Let's start by implementing the actual logic. First, we can assume that the input value, or value, is a string, so we can change the type from any to string. Next, let's use the built-in parseInt JavaScript function to try parsing the input string to an integer. Let's add some conditional logic here in case we see any errors. If the return value is not a number, we can make sure to throw a bad request exception. Otherwise, we can return the modified value, which is now an integer. Perfect. With this in place, we can now bind our pipe to some param decorators. Let's open up the coffee's controller file and navigate to the findOne method. Before we do anything here, let's add a single console log to log the ID argument's value. Now let's navigate to Insomnia and execute a GET request to the coffees/abc endpoint. Note, we're going to pass abc a string instead of a number like 1 or 10. Let's switch to VS Code and fire up the terminal and see what was logged. As we can see, it outputs NaN, or not a number. This means that although our ID abc could not have been parsed to a number, the findOne method was called with an incorrect argument. To prevent situations like this, let's use our newly created parseInt pipe to validate the incoming parameter, and in case it's not parsable to an integer, our pipe will automatically throw a validation exception for us. So let's pass in our parseInt pipe as the second parameter to our param ID here, save our changes, and test the endpoint again. Great, as we can see, this time we received a 400 error with the message stating that validation failed. As we said, Nest comes with this pipe already, but hopefully this example showcases the power of pipes and how you could implement your own to do a multitude of useful processes for your application.